So, welcome to all of you. Um, I don't think we've had a Sangha in a while, just because of the way that I guess life worked out. So, what we're doing today is we are continuing our leadership to Sangha. So, this is our source material for this book, and from this book, sorry, Leadership for an Age of Higher Consciousness, Volume 2. You can't see Volume 2 so clearly, but this is by Bhakti Tirtha Swami. So we had a session, it would have been before the lockdown. So maybe was it November? Okay, it's November. I'll be honest, I am tempted to start the whole thing again, but with different points, simply because it's been, I think it's been a while, and maybe, you know, people will have a bit of a, let's say, amnesia about some of the key things that we discussed. So what we'll do is we'll do that, but we'll take it still from a different angle. So even if you were there before, you actually still have new content and new ideas that we're going to be bringing to your attention today. Let me begin by framing why this is such a crucial topic for us as devotees, and for those who are spiritually minded in general. So it's interesting, if we look into the world right now, we can see that there are many, many issues. And you can look at it superficially and say, well, you know, it's been a very difficult time. People are under a lot of pressure, especially some people may not feel so protected. They may feel vulnerable, etc., etc. But all of that is rooted in leadership. Think back to your parenting, okay? When a parent is protective, that means someone who's in a position of authority. When they're sufficiently protective, that sense that I'm safe becomes internalized by the child. Okay, therefore, the child goes out into the world, and they feel sufficiently secure and sufficiently able to set boundaries and to also push back when they need to. Okay, so think about this, try and understand this thread. So the authorities are meant to give protection. Protection means that I put some boundaries around you, some protective boundaries, so people can't do whatever they want to you, okay? And within those boundaries, I also give you encouragement, nourishment, and bring you up. And because you got that when you were young, you internalize that into your character. So then when you go out into the world as an adult, you already have boundaries, okay? So when someone does something that oversteps your boundaries, like, excuse me, no, that's not gonna happen, right? You already have a voice of a parent from when you were young, encouraging it and motivating you. So then when you're out in the world, that voice is now become part of you. It's internalized. Okay, so something happens. Okay, we can get over it. In other words, you start to encourage yourself. So the internalized voice becomes your own mentality. You see the point? So what was given before has now become part of me. In the modern world now, there's a huge thing about cancel culture, right? I'm sure some of you have heard about that, right? The idea that someone says something that another group didn't like, and it's like, we should get rid of them. So there's one thing, and I'm not judging that. I'm just mentioning different trends. In the modern world now, there's increasing issues around mental health and so on. Believe it or not, all of these things are directly and implicitly related to leadership. Because what we've seen in the modern world and what we continue to see is that in the modern world, the leaders are not leading. In the Manu Samhita, and maybe we'll get to that quote today, there's a statement that the king that does not protect his citizens is a dead king. Okay? And we know that traditionally, the group who would excel and have the responsibility for leadership were the Kshatriyas. And Sanskrit is a very interesting language, because the language also reveals additional information about that particular field. So Kshatriya, right? So literally one who protects others from being hurt. Okay, so we have the etymology, the meaning of the words. We have the dharma, the nature, right? The leader is meant to protect. Now, we can also use what we call anuman, which is inference. If the leader is meant to protect, that means that by protection, there are good outcomes. By inference, we can therefore understand that any deviation from that will lead to suboptimal outcomes. Does that make sense? So just like the parents don't protect the child, it can lead to suboptimal outcomes, right? The leader, let's say the politicians, do not protect the society, it will also lead to suboptimal outcomes, okay? The community leader doesn't protect the people, that will also lead to suboptimal outcomes. The way that Krishna has designed the material world is such that if people do things according to Dharma, and of course, even above that Sanatana Dharma, then you get the best, literally, and Prabhupada sometimes talks about this, you get literally the best of, material energy is a bad bargain in that sense, you get the best of the bad bargain. But beyond that, going deviations away from that means that, okay, now there will be additional challenges, right? Or, this is interesting, so one side, there'll be additional challenges, the other side, there'll be the same number of challenges, but there'll be reduced capacity to deal with them. Okay, so it is understood that the leader makes the age. And that's a very core principle, by the way. The leader makes the age rather than the age making the leader. Okay, so when people feel protected, that's a driver for security. When they feel secure, that's a driver for success, actually. Because the more a person feels secure, the more that they're likely, excuse me, to look at things objectively, to look at things clearly, to make what's the word? To make a realistic analysis of the situation, and to have the confidence to drive through what they should be driving through, their behaviors, their activities, their goals, to drive them through even in the face of difficulties and even in the face of challenges. So what we're seeing in the modern world, to be very honest, is the result of poor leadership. Because unfortunately in the modern world, the leaders, rather than protecting, what do you tend to see that leaders are doing in the material world? Any guesses?
Exploiting.
Exactly, right? I knew if I just asked that question, it will be very obvious. And to your point, Rupeshwara, let's take let's take that logic of the Shastra. If protection brings security, then exploitation will bring what? Any guesses?
Insecurity.
Absolutely, absolutely. You see? So, and not just insecurity, actually. Insecurity is one outcome. So the people who are meant to be protecting us, they're now taking advantage of us. So one thing is it brings insecurity. The second thing is it brings distrust. The second thing it brings is distrust, because now I'm not sure if I can be really open with these authorities in case they will misuse what I'm actually saying or doing. Whereas in the previous example, when there's protection, I can be open, because by being open, I will get solutions to my problem, right? Whereas if the leaders are exploitative, then when I'm open, rather than getting solutions to my problems or the flaws will be used against me. So it brings distrust, and due to exploitation, it also brings lack of cohesion in a society, okay? So in a society of people, what's going to happen is, if I know the leaders are going to protect me, then if there's a disagreement between me and another person and I'm wronged, I can go to the leadership and the leaders will say, yes, we've done all the analysis, we've investigated, you have been wronged, we're going to stand up for you, defend you, and address the issue, right? So what's this called in English? Is justice. There'll be fairness, there'll be justice. Okay, you were mistreated, you go to the law, okay, we're impartial. We want to make sure that everything is done properly, people are treated fairly. You've been treated badly, we're going to investigate, then we'll actually do something to, to redress the balance. Again, if the other side happens, if the leaders are exploitative, then even if someone's mistreating another person, then we're thinking, these people don't care. If I go to them, they're not going to actually do anything. They're not going to protect me. That's the key point. Rather than protect, they're going to exploit. So they're not going to care. They're not going to protect me. So then the whole society, the social thread starts to unwind. Because what happens as a result then is you get a broken up society. And again, how many of us are seeing this happening right now? Right? We're all seeing this happen right now. What you'll see more and more when leadership is bad is that people get into factions, and the mentality that comes down is every man and every woman for themselves. And the reason why that's coming is because that's what they're picking up from the leadership. You see, leadership is not, it's not what people say. I mean, it's a factor, but it's actually more, people say it's more what people do. And that's true, because what people do is has a greater impact. But the essential answer, to be honest, is leadership is the coherence between what is said and what is done. It's the coherence, because even if a leader is good in terms of example, but says the wrong thing, that causes a certain degree of incoherence. You see? So let's say the leader has good intention and is protective, but he or she speaks harshly, right? Or they speak callously. So they're doing the right things, but they're communicating it the wrong way. Even then, that can cause some incoherence. But what we have in the modern world is generally they're not acting properly and they're not speaking properly either, right? So it's a double negative, for want of a better word. So we began by talking about leadership being about protection for the security. We talked about the deviance from that principle, from that dharmic principle, that when there's exploitation, it can lead to distrust in the leader. We talked about how it can lead to factions. So people break up, communities break down, right? It can also lead to suspicion and paranoia. Yeah. Because again, that insecurity means that I'm not going to be protected. I have to be vigilant to see, to see if there's any kind of encroaching on my own, what's the word? Encroaching upon my own legitimate boundaries, like that. So the breakdown of community on a global, on a national, on a social level, it all comes down to leadership. So what we explained, or what we touched upon last time, is that when we want to understand something, there are many self-help books, there are many courses, seminars, videos on leadership. However, the root of these programs is usually two things. One is the individual's own logic and reasoning. Okay, so that's one source of the leadership training out there. The other, and there's a lot of this also, where it's based upon empirical data. Okay, now both of them have some validity, but they both have some what's the word I'm looking for? They will miss something. They have some weakness. So what's the validity and what's the weakness? So when people use logic and when people use empirical data, it will definitely, if the people are intelligent and somewhat impartial, they will definitely pick up something about leadership. So for example, if I do the research, which happens a lot, where they will go and interview successful leaders, okay? And then they'll, try to figure out what's common, what are the common activities or the common behaviors or the common attitudes of these successful leaders. Then they'll write a book about it and say, we interviewed 100 leaders and these are the things that we found that they all had in common, and this is the formula for leadership. So they'll get something, okay? But this is where the problem comes also. So if I do that, I remember there was an article on Steve Jobs and it was a very interesting article, and they were saying how successful he was. And they said that he doesn't care about people's feelings. He will just tell people what they need to do. And if people didn't do what he said, that he'd get rid of them. And they said that, and then the author concluded that the reason why I'm not successful is that I can't be as cutthroat as Steve Jobs is. Okay, now this is where it gets difficult, because you could say, oh, but Steve Jobs was successful. Okay, but do you know, was he successful because of what he was doing? or was he successful in spite of some of the things that he was doing? So we know that for success, karma is a factor, right? And we know that for success, things play out over a period of time. So it may be that he was very successful for a period, but it may be that some of the people who felt that they were mistreated by him were about to sue him and were about to sue the company. It may be that he got away with treating people badly. And it may be the case that, let's say Apple is a multi-billion-pound company. It may be the case that had he treated them well, that company would have been a multi-trillion-pound company. So this is a trouble with empiricism. You see, someone says it's successful compared to what, right? You say, well, it's compared to the other companies, but actually that person, Steve Jobs, may have had a certain karma where he was meant to be a trillionaire, but because of his behavior, he was now just a billionaire, right? So we have to judge it against its actual potential. We have to judge a situation against its actual full potential. And this is why when the knowledge is coming from a scriptural source, it's a superior source. Because as with everything in the material world, including social dynamics, they are ultimately coming from Krishna. So leadership, according to our tradition, is not something that was invented by humankind, right? We know in the spiritual world, in Dwaraka, Krishna is a king, right? We know Ayodhya, Lord Ram is in that position of kingship. We know that there are eternal associates of the Lord who are Raj Rishis, great saintly kings, etc. So again, the idea here is that leadership is actually coming from the spiritual world, from the spiritual platform. And therefore it's reflected in this particular world. What we may conclude from this is that if we start to learn and apply the comprehensive science of leadership within our own lives, then we can literally become more and more strong in our leadership. And leadership means, in a broad sense, first of all, because we're leading our own lives, okay? So how we lead our lives, how we lead the people who are, who we have responsibility for, yeah? And the results that we start to see come through. So the formula that we're using here is the same formula that's given by Jiva Goswami in the Tattva-sandarbhas. In the Tattva-sandarbhas, Jiva Goswami lists 10 praman. Actually, it's mentioned in this book a bit later on as well. But he gives 10 praman, which praman means evidence. And of those 10 praman, the top 3 are particularly relevant to devotees. The first one is Shabda, which means accepting knowledge from scriptural sources. The second is Anuman, which is inference, right? So logic, reasoning. So how we're using that reason to understand something. The third is Pratyaksha. Pratyaksha means direct perception. Pratyaksha also means empiricism, because direct perception is basically external collection of data by observation, right? So it can happen on an individual level. So you just watch and see something yourself. It can happen on an extended level, meaning that you've done a survey, but it's still part of the same thing. It's pratyaksha. Okay, it's empiricism. Now, the wonderful thing about this, which is rarely understood, is that that system of evidence, it also works as a system of verification. Okay, what do I mean by this? So stage 1, we gain some information, shabda, from scripture. Okay, stage number 2, with that scriptural evidence, we try to think, what's the implication of this? What does this imply? And stage 3, we start to see, or we look to see, if what's implied or inferred by that knowledge is actually playing out in the physical world, let's say. Okay, for example, what we talked about at the beginning. So if this idea of leadership meaning protection for security, okay, that the leaders are meant to protect in order to generate security in the citizens, right? Then, so that's the scriptural understanding. Then what we do is we consider, okay, so if that's the scriptural understanding, and if I what does that imply? It implies that if, let's say that someone is a parent and they act in such a way that they protect their children, right? This is the implication. Then the implication is that relative to other people, that child or those children should feel more secure, should feel more confident, should feel more robust and resilient, okay? So I've taken the statement of scripture, Shabda, I've worked out what are the implications of this, and then the last stage is, now I know that know what the implications are, then I should be able to observe. If someone, I know this friend of mine, he brought up his children, he was very protective, not overprotective, by the way, because that works against it, but he was protective. He gave them encouragement, he motivated them, he would stand up for them. If they were being mistreated, he would defend them, etc. And then I should see, as that child is growing up, compared to other children, is that child more secure? Is that child more confident? And if I see that play out in the real world, then I know, yeah, that means it's actually true. You see? So the scriptural knowledge is not just a question of believing something. Inherent in the teachings is the means of experiment, right? Inherent in the teachings of the scriptures is a medium or let's say a framework by which you can both apply the knowledge and see if the knowledge is actually correct, or rather see if your application of the knowledge is correct. That's the accurate thing to say, because the knowledge is perfect, okay? And you can do this across the board with the scriptural knowledge. Yeah, okay. So as giving that as a framework, let's get into it. What I'm going to do to begin with, because I think this is I think this is a key aspect of it. What I'm going to do to begin with is I'm going to just list these 10 principles of empowered leadership, okay? And this is also very interesting because in Vedic knowledge, actually, and this is different to many systems of knowledge, in Vedic knowledge, they often start with the conclusion, okay? Now, we know this as devotees. You come into the temples day one, what do they tell you? Okay, you're not the body. That you'll be told, okay, you can, the primary sadhana or practice for realizing the supreme in this age is to chant the holy names of Krishna, okay? And Krishna is a supreme personality of Godhead, and he can be realized through devotional service. So this is technically called Siddhanta. So actually that's a superior way of teaching, by the way, okay? Inherent or implicit in the system of the Vedas is a superior way of teaching. So what happens in spiritual circles is first you're given the conclusion, and then you're given the entire calculation that ends in that conclusion. It's like you're going into a maths exam. What the teacher says, look, I want to help you. The answer to question number 1 is this. The answer to question number 2 is this. The answer to question number 3 is this. The answer to question number 4 is this. And then having given you the answers to each of the questions, now the teacher is going to take you through the process by which that answer is achieved. Okay, so we're going to do a similar thing. What we're going to do is begin by giving you these principles for leadership, and then what we're going to do is, as we go through the sessions, we'll explain how these conclusions have been reached. Okay, so, and these have been wonderfully put together by Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj in this Leadership for an Age of Higher Consciousness number 2. So the first one, they love people and are sensitive to their emotions and needs. As we've been reflecting over, I don't know how many years, on this idea of transformation, what we've come to see more and more is that transformation has a lot to do with people not just hearing the knowledge, but really engaging with it. Because the more that you engage, the more that we engage with something, and we were talking about this in the morning class, the more it rewires the neural pathways in the brain, okay? In the Bhagavatam, it talks about when we hear, we should hear with certain qualities or characteristics, Shushruta and Kritibihi, okay? It talks about hearing with rapt attention, humility, respect for what's being heard, all of these things. And in neuroscience, the exact understanding they're coming to in neuroscience is that when people hear or learn, and they're very attentive in that learning process, and they're very respectful to the knowledge which is coming through, right? And then they also meditate on what's being shared, and they apply it. It literally reworks the neural pathways in the brain. It triggers increasing degrees of what they call neuroplasticity. So the bhakti process is inherently and implicitly a process of transformation if it's applied properly. If it's not applied properly, you get a different, well, let's say this more as accurately as possible. If it's not applied properly, one still gets the benefit, and that's testimony to the power of the process, but it does tend to take a longer time. Yeah? So the result is still there, but the journey takes a lot longer to achieve its goal. Okay, so this first one I wanted to discuss, and what we'll do is we'll discuss each in turn, again, to get us to engage in with the material. We've touched upon one element of this, that this idea that they love people and are sensitive to their emotions and needs, right? So if someone loves you, how do you know? How do you know that someone actually loves you, or let's say cares about you? How do you know?
They ask how you are, how you're feeling.
Okay. So definitely one aspect is that there's a dialogue and there's a consideration of you. So there's something of you being in the center, right? Okay, interesting. Thank you for that. What else? How do you know that someone has your own best interests at heart?
They would know you better than you, and they would know that there's something wrong with you even before you even saying a word.
Good, good. So there's something about awareness, because they know you and they're conscious or cognizant of you. They pick up those changes in your behavior that says, there could be something going wrong here. Maybe the person's in a bad mood. Maybe that something's not right in their life. So they notice, we call it deviations from the norm. Okay, what else?
They serve you without, like, unconditionally.
Okay, absolutely. There's a sense of service. There's not just, and it actually goes beyond obligation. There's a sense of an enthusiasm to add value to your existence. Yeah, absolutely. So this idea of loving people and being sensitive to their emotions and needs is critical, especially this word needs. I think Bhakti Charumarj, he told one of his disciples, who told me, and he was talking about this idea of a leader has to have a vision. He was mentioning that point. They have to be able to infuse people about that vision. And he also said they have to be able to also facilitate people in terms of making that vision a reality. Very, very interesting. It's a brilliant insight, actually, by Marge, you know? So this idea of facilitation, it relates to this idea of needs, you see? Because people have needs. The leader is meant to take care of, I mean, especially in a let's say in a Vedic society, the leader was meant to understand and take care of people in terms of their physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual needs. And when we look at that, that very much correlates with the famous hierarchy of needs by Maslow, you see? And again, this is why this knowledge is so powerful. As we understand this, and as we start to look at where we're strong, where we can apply, what we can do in our own lives with those who are under our leadership, we can literally gain more blessings and gain far more powerful outcomes in everything that we do. The reason why we've been given such a gift by Prabhupada, you know, and directly from Prabhupada and also from Prabhupada's followers, is because when you have a comprehensive understanding of something, then whenever something is not working out properly, because your understanding is comprehensive, all you need to do is you look at the comprehensive understanding. You see what things are being done. You see what things are not being done. you see? And then by filling in those gaps, you can literally almost guarantee that the outcomes that you're striving for are much more likely to manifest. Okay, so these 10 principles of leadership, whenever you're leading anyone in any project or whatever, if you see that, even if you see that you're getting good outcomes, if you do this analysis of looking at these 10 principles of leadership, any gaps in any of those 10 principles will be a reason why the results are at one level, whereas they could be even higher. Okay, because once these 10 things are done nicely, done consistently, then you know that whatever outcomes that you're getting, they're the best outcomes that you can get from a leadership perspective, everything else being equal. And that part, by the way, that everything else being equal is important, because when we're leading people, each of the people that we're leading, they also have a starting point. It's somewhat similar to good education, right? So in the education industry nowadays, what they will do is they will do an analysis of the child's level when they came into that school, you see? And then what they'll do is they'll do an analysis over time as to how far the child has progressed from their baseline, from when they came in, you see? So again, this idea of leadership and a comprehensive understanding means that you can take people forward to whatever degree you're leading, and to the degree that they're open based upon wherever they were in the beginning, okay? So this idea of being sensitive to people's needs, sensitive also to their emotions, and loving people. I was in New York, and we were in the Bhakti Center, and Radhanath Maharaj was giving a class. It was in the morning, and he made such a profound point about this. He was saying that the first responsibility of a leader is to build relationship, which is very, very interesting, because it links to this particular point. They love people and are sensitive to their emotions and needs. So through the relationship, one can express affection. Sensitive to people's emotions, as you said earlier, if I don't know, I think as Rack said in particular, if I don't know what they're normally like, I won't be able to be sensitive to see, oh, they're normally quite sober, and today they look a little bit different. They may be less grounded. I will be able to notice that deviation from the norm because I don't know what the norm is. And I don't know what the norm is because we've not actually got to know each other over time. Okay, point number 2, they help people feel happy and secure. We touched upon this idea of security, but this point about they help people feel happy. Prabhupada says, Sarva Sukhino Bhavantu, right? Let everyone be happy. And that's particularly important as a narrative for leaders. They help people to feel happy and secure. So secure, we talked about facility. We talked about the emotional need being met. Okay, so emotional need is protection. The outcome, security. The other thing about happiness is it has a lot to do with appreciation. In the Leadership 1 book by Bhakti Tirtha Swami, and in this Leadership 2 book, you'll touch upon this many times. So if people are doing something, they're making an offering, and that offering is appreciated, what's the outcome, or what does it inspire? And I'd like to hear from someone else, anyone else who's not spoken. If you're in a project where the people are working in that project and they feel appreciated for what they're doing, what does that inspire from those particular people? Thoughts?
They want to go beyond what they've been asked to do. So they'll come up with their own ideas, their own initiative, and they'll just go beyond just doing what needs to be done in service.
Absolutely. So thank you very much for doing the time. So in terms of my own job, we talk about this a lot. So it's called employee engagement. There's a company called Gallup Strengths Finders. And what they found is that, you know, you can actually, there are certain things you can do that drive the engagement of people that you're leading, working with, employing, etc. Okay, and of course, all of these things were perfectly done by Prabhupada. He was just brilliant. If you want to understand leadership, if you look at how Prabhupada led, it is literally a perfect example of empowered leadership. he had a brilliant balance also, right? Of keeping the core principles and not watering down the standards so that there was real potency, because purity is a force, and at the same time giving a tremendous amount of value to people, right? So when people feel valued, it drives productivity. Now, again, let's follow the logic. So people who are working in a company and they're being paid and they feel valued, they go above and beyond, and it drives productivity. So how does this apply when we are dealing with people who are voluntary, who are not being paid? How does that affect this dynamic of appreciation? Does it make it as important, less important, or more important? Thoughts?
It will be a lot more important because they don't get paid. I mean, payment is appreciation and encouragement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Raghunath Bhattaprabhu. So again, you can use the logic of the Shastra and see, actually, if this is important, even in an employed situation, it becomes even more essential when people are doing things just from the goodness of their own hearts. Yeah. And the appreciation, as you said, it actually drives both, it drives two things actually. Appreciation drives both quantity. So there's the idea that if people feel appreciated, they'll go above and beyond, they'll do more. But as Sudhir Nitai Prabhu properly said, it also increases the quality of what's done. Because if what I'm doing is appreciated, which means it's being noticed and it's being valued, then I will try to do it to a better standard. Because again, the implication is that better standard, that quality will also be noticed and also valued. Yeah. And also it drives innovation as well. When people feel valued and appreciated for what they're doing, then going out of their way means quantity, it means quality, but it also means innovation. It leaves an impression on the mind, actually. So now my service is important. So now what else can I do to make that service better? What else can I do to expand that service? What else can I do? What other services can I do? Right? And in that way, things expand. So this idea of making people feel happy has a lot to do with appreciation, because the soul, Anandamaya Vyasat, is pleasure seeking by nature. So the opposite is, right, let's look at the opposite then, right? So we're again following the logic of the Shastra. So if that dynamic of appreciation leads to an increase in quality, quantity, and innovation, what would the opposite lead to? In other words, you're working for, and some of us may have experienced this, right? You have a boss who you're doing a great job on a day-to-day basis, nothing is said. But the moment something goes wrong, then a lot is being said, right? Let's say boss in the workplace, or even you're working in a project and it's under a devotee who doesn't notice anything good that's done, but anything bad, that becomes the thing that's amplified. What does that do to employee engagement and to productivity? Thoughts? Any guesses?
Very well, Prabhu. Skirish. I think it uninspires you, but it drives detachment, conflict, demotivation. But people get distracted in the wrong way. So nobody's focusing on the common goal. Everybody sets a second agenda. So what you end up with is a split or a diverse team.
Yes, fantastic point. Thank you very much for that. So yeah, it can literally kill these different dynamics of productivity in terms of quantity, quality, and innovation. And because things aren't being appreciated, even if the leader doesn't mean to do so, the message or the interpretation that the staff may make is that it's not important anyway, right? Because what's being done isn't being noticed, isn't being appreciated, so it's not important anyway. People may also feel that they're not valued, right? And what happens when people don't feel valued is that they look elsewhere for those connections and relationships where they will feel that they're valued. Yeah. And that's one of the ways in which talent is lost in an organization. So in the financial services space, for example, There's increasing concern that young people don't want to work for a bank, right? There's increasing concern that when people come out of the education system, they want to work for Apple, Facebook, Google, Amazon, place which have the branding that it's fun, innovative, collaborative, etc. Right? So many financial services companies, they are particularly focusing now on making sure that the leadership show appreciation for the staff as a means by which they will not only attract talent, but they will also retain talented individuals as well. Okay. So these are just some of the dynamics around the second point. So anyway, we're going to go through these briefly because these are the 10 comprehensive points of leadership. Then as we go through all the different seminars, we'll be expanding on all this in detail through the points that Bhakti Tirthamaj makes about each of these. So point number 3, they create lasting value at all times. This is an interesting one. Leaders, real leaders, create lasting value at all times. Now, how do we understand this? I'd like to know, what do you think this means? That a leader, like an empowered leader, creates lasting value at all times. Any guesses, any thoughts or reflections on that statement?
Yes, sir, just Harshal here. I think if I look at like short-term KPIs versus kind of long-term goals, that's what came to my mind.
Yeah,
so short-term fix to get a bonus versus long-term, how are we going to protect our customers? Is kind of what's as an example.
Fantastic. There's a famous leadership writer. His name is Jim Collins. He wrote a book called Good to Great. And he talks about 5 levels of leaders. And he talks about the topmost level of leader. And he describes various things that they do. He talks about them having humility and strong professional will as some of the key qualities. Expanding on that point, I think it's him also, he writes a book called Built to Last. And this is the idea of doing things which create lasting value. I'm going to share with you an example. I know sometimes devotees who are working on projects, right? And I've observed over the years, sometimes you have devotees who are working on projects, but and actually they get people involved and the project gets done. But the way it was done was maybe a bit harsh, right? Meaning maybe it was a bit chaotic, but they got some outcome. So at the end of it all, when people attended the project, the program or whatever, it seemed like a nice program. But the people involved saw how chaotic it was to make it happen. They saw how they weren't appreciated, or they saw how things were done last minute, or it was like, stressful. And so what happens is the next time that devotee approaches them and says, let's work on something again, they're like, no, thank you very much. That's once was enough, right? So this idea of lasting value has many hidden dimensions to it. Lasting value is partly one dimension that is the output, but reputation is also lasting value. Reputation is a subtle form of currency, okay? So in business, they talk about this a lot, goodwill. So if we worked on something together and it was a great experience, you learned a lot, you grew a lot, you were valued, then the next time I'm like, dude, let's work on something else again, you'll be like, yeah, of course. We had such a great time last time, right? We're happy to work on something again, you see? So this lasting value is also the reputational value. So sometimes we have leaders, they get stuff done, but they leave a trail of dead bodies behind them, right? And I see a few people nodding, right? So the leader, they got it done, but they left a trail of dead bodies behind them. And now that's poison in the system. What do I mean by poison in the system? Those people who felt hard done by, those people who felt it was chaotic and a negative experience, they will then go and tell others, right? I was like, yeah, I'm going to be in a project with this person. Oh, okay, good luck. What do you mean? Yeah, I worked with that person before and it was chaotic. It was so much stress. They didn't appreciate what we were doing. They were shouting at people, etc., etc., etc. You see? So again, the project got done, right? But now the reputational damage is there, and that means there'll be diminishing returns. So the next time the person wants to do that project, the people will not want to work with them. So the people who worked with them before will not want to work with them. The people who worked with them before have now told others who've heard, I heard that they're like this. So they've asked me to work with them. I've said I'm busy, so I'm not going to work with them, right? So these are some of the subtle dimensions of this idea of lasting value. The other factor in lasting value is that ultimately, if we as people who know about the higher, who know about the goal of life, if we can be engaged in initiatives which actually help to bring people to that realization, then just the fact that the project, the endeavor, in some way, shape or form, directs people towards Krishna, that itself will also be a source of lasting value. It is literally like opening the doors to the spiritual world for the people who will be on the receiving end of the project's outputs or who will be involved in the project itself. So that's another aspect of lasting value. Let's go on. Number 4, they are philosophers. They seek to convey ultimate abiding truth. Okay, I'd like to hear about that one. That a leader is a philosopher who seeks to convey ultimate abiding truth. Thoughts? What does that mean to you? What's implied by that?
Sorry.
Go on, Rupesha Prabhu, I'll let you go ahead. I'm on a bus on the way to work.
Hi, Bhuta, this is Girish again. It's that you're not a maverick. So, you know, like you abide by the law.
Mm-hmm.
So you have certain principles that you're governed by. And then you're not going to do something off the cuff or react in a way which is not abiding by the rules.
Yeah, fantastic point. So this idea of principle is very important. If people know that you're principled, then even if something goes on, they know you will treat them fairly because your behavior is not based upon a whim. And it's not based upon, my spiritual master calls it situational ethics, which means that I'll just do what's convenient for me at that time, right? But without boundary. When a leader is high quality, because they're principle centered, then it's understood that actually you can address the situation because actually this principle, this is unfair, right? And even if it's profitable, but it's unfair, because they're principle centered, they will not choose profit over people, for example, right? So they're going to do what's right, even if it costs them something in the short term, because they abide and they have that integrity. They abide by and they have that integrity that we have to do things according to principles. If they don't have that, then let's say today they're nice to you, right? But tomorrow it becomes politically expedient or more profitable to, this is saying that they have in the UK, to throw you under the bus, right? You know that saying, right? Then for one of, well, if we stab this person in the back, we'll be able to gain more this way. All right. Well, yeah, it's not a bad person, but we can gain a lot more here. So then they'll stab you in the back, right? Because they see, all right, we can gain more. And of course, that also leads to, again, lack of trust and reputational damage, right? There's some statistics around this. In the past, if people left a company and they had a good experience, they will tell, maybe 1 or 2 people, right? In the past, if people left the company and they had a bad experience, they will tell at least 10 people. That was in the past. Now, because of social media, that bad experience literally can go viral. You see? So what you have immediately is a huge mass of people who've all heard, oh, this person is not good, don't work with him, don't work with her, they're like this, they're like that. So the reputational damage, it gets destroyed, which can also then lead to all kinds of opportunities closing down, which would otherwise do literally the exact opposite. Opportunities which would open up now becomes closed down. Yeah. So this is something really important to understand about this particular point. I'll also share one other thing. There's another implication, this idea that they are philosophers. I think we mentioned this maybe in a previous session about having thinking time, right? That's one of the factors that differentiates the leader in the mode of passion from the leader in the mode of goodness. When the leader is in the mode of goodness, you'll see that there's a lot more consideration, right? Consideration of where are we now, right? Where are we going? And then how are we meant to get there, right? So this kind of consideration is a key part of it. And what that does, for every hour of thought, one can literally save hundreds of hours around activity. Because if we think as a precursor to action, we can work out a faster route to our particular goal. Yeah, that's the key point. So it's really about having that idea of being a philosopher. That means being someone who is thoughtful and who is also making decisions based, as you said, on this idea of abiding truth. So principles, making decisions based upon wisdom. Okay, I was actually I was creating this it's a means for making decisions based upon the scriptures, and I was looking at different things which are in there, and it's actually quite incredible that in order to make healthy decisions, if one uses the scriptural understanding, you can do tremendous things. I'll give you one simple example that I've been using a lot over the years, right? So in our Vedic understanding, there are some principles which are given in a sutra form. So one sutra, which I really love, is that everything unnatural is an enemy. Okay. Now, if you unpack it, what it means is the closer that we live according to a natural way of life, the less we create unnecessary obstacles for us, right? So practical application in terms of decision making is, let's say that we need to get something for health, right? So we need to get some particular product for our health. Now, there's many different products. Some will be more artificial, some will be more natural. If we can find a product which is more natural, and everyone intuitively understands this, right? No, so on the labeling, it will say no preservatives, no additives, completely organic, and people will be more likely to purchase that product because there's an intuitive understanding that actually you can't improve upon Krishna's system. So the closer it is to Krishna's own arrangement, the less there'll be unnecessary and also unpredictable side effects, right? And what we've often found now is that the more things are manufactured and artificial, even though they may solve the problem in the short term, in the mid to long term, what we often find is they actually only mask the symptoms, and they sometimes even just repress the issue. And while they're doing all of that, they create new issues that now have to be unpicked, untangled, and dealt with. Right? So this idea, everything unnatural is an enemy, and that applies across the board. So what's the natural cycle? Natural cycle is to wake up with the sun and to sleep when it's dark, right? So if I go against that natural cycle, I mess up my circadian rhythm, which is the internal clock within the body, which means that now my cortisol is coming out at the wrong times. So I'm a bit stressed out or anxious. My melatonin, which is meant to come in the evening so I can go to sleep, now that's off. So now my sleep is also disturbed, right? So I've messed up my circadian rhythm by not living according to the natural cycle. Okay, another example, it's natural that, let's say, it's natural to eat at the right times. So if instead I'm just eating all the time or starving myself, again, out of line with nature, unnatural. So then it creates another set of issues, right? It's natural to live according to my means. okay? But if instead I've got this much, but I want to live outside of my means, so I'm getting all kinds of loans and I'm borrowing money, again, unnatural. I'm living outside my means. Unnatural means unsustainable. So if we look, we see nature is sustainable. It sustains itself, the entire system, right? Self-maintenance. If we go outside of the natural cycle, we create all kinds of difficulties and issues. And of course, what's the most unnatural thing to do? The most unnatural thing is to completely starve ourselves of spiritual nourishment, even though we're a spiritual being. So that really takes everything off balance. Let's go on to the next one. Number 5. They lead from the inside out, knowing that character is power. This is a very big one. This one's a very big one. There are hidden systems within the Vedas which help people to develop character. When I say hidden, they are fully present and fully prominent, but we don't understand them as systems of character development. When a young child is growing up, the stories that they are told actually shape their character. Okay? When a young child is growing up, if they hear stories such as the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, etc., whether you know it or not, you're actually developing their character. Why? Because consciously and unconsciously, they're being given a narrative which shows them the link between character, behaviors, and outcomes. One of the biggest dangers of the modern society is in the film industry. When you have films and narratives which glorify deviant behavior, it actually puts a narrative into the minds of modern society that actually deviant behavior will lead to both good outcomes externally and good outcomes internally. So then people are encouraged to think, you know what, it's okay if I cheat people. It's okay if I lie to people. It's okay if I betray people. It will still work out. It creates that narrative internally. And of course, the problem is that even though that's something that they saw in a movie, that's not the reality of life. We know karma. Karma means that what goes around will come around. So if I do that, in the film, it may be that the person gets away with it, but it's just a film. In real life, that's not going to happen, right? In real life, there'll be huge and negative repercussions to those behaviors. So the stories that we expose ourselves to, the narratives that we expose ourselves to, are also the narratives that we internalize. Right? So when people study Mahabharata, Ramayana, Bhagavatam, they actually internalize the narratives of those characters, actually. And that is one means of developing stronger character and stronger integrity. Another key means, and this is given, this is in the Brihathora Shastra of Parashara Muni. Okay, so Parashara Muni is the father of Vyasadeva. He says that a person's behavior is based upon 3 things. He says it's your nature, your upbringing, and your association. Right? So consider these 3 different stages like filters. So consider that the soul is like the light, and that light is shining through these different filters or lenses. The first lens it shines through is the nature of the individual, right? That meaning the Varna, the nature in that sense. The second lens that it shines through is the upbringing of the person. Traditionally, the parents were meant to understand the nature of the child and encourage them accordingly, which means that the upbringing would be coherent with the nature. Okay, so first lens is nature, second lens is upbringing, the third lens is association, right? So the association, it can actually rectify the other 2. It's that if it's dealt with in a respectful way, in a sincere way, with an open heart, and it's good association. So if persons were brought up really well and they have that kind of association, it will reinforce and bring the fruit of that upbringing and that nature. If there's even challenges from earlier points, it will actually heal those issues and bring out positive fruits as well. Okay, so association, that's why Sadhu Sangha, you'll hear it again and again as you go through the books of Prabhupada, is considered so important, right? So this idea of character and leading from the inside out is really important, because if you're strong inside, it's actually more than 50% of the battle won. That's why an intelligent person is always working on themselves. So it's a very interesting thing. We'll just touch upon this. Right now, there's loads of studies on this. In the world right now, we increasingly have people who lean towards conservative or liberal perspectives. And actually, both perspectives have their benefits and their issues. I pull a post on Instagram about this. So some people, they're by nature, that by birth, they have a nature which leans more to the conservative side. Okay, and I'm not talking necessarily political parties, but I'm just talking the actual mentality. So that mentality, it's more around, actually, people who are more conservative in nature tend to do well, or tend to be good in a managerial role as well, which is an interesting point. One of the things around it is the conservative nature. It tends to be more structural, right? So this idea of borders, structure, timetables, these are all facets of a managerial mindset, okay? And along with that, the conservative nature tends to be, what's the word? It tends to be more technically minded, which also means that it tends to be more into the detail, okay? And it tends to be more engaging with the actual realities of a situation, okay? So this is the conservative mindset. The liberal mindset, in some ways, is very opposite. Liberals are found more in the creative industries. Much of the media is controlled by people who have a liberal mindset, okay? Liberal mindset tend to be more willing and able to think laterally, right? So, you know, this idea of thinking outside the box. I was watching some research on this, and it was pointed out that, you know, people say that anyone can be creative, right? Now, to be honest, anyone can attempt creativity and anyone can be more creative than they are right now. But there are some mindsets which have a natural, strong aptitude to be creative, right? And it's inherent. It's again inherent. It doesn't mean you can't improve it to some extent, but there's a significant capability from the inherent perspective. So liberals tend to be more creative. They tend to be more open door in the sense of, you know, no borders, right? They tend to be able to think laterally, come up with new ideas, new perspectives, new ways of doing things. Now, going back to the conservative mindset, when the conservative mindset is overdone or exaggerated, it can lead to harshness, okay? So it can lead to being realistic to the point of being skeptical and to the point of being harsh, and also overly calculating, right? So on an extreme, it can become, you know, I can see what's going on with everyone. I can actually figure out, I can analyze in a very cold and detached and impartial way what's going on. And to the extreme, that then can lead to exploitation and manipulation, because they can kind of figure out, I know how to cheat this person. I know if I say this to them like that in this way, I'll get them to do whatever I want. So that's an extreme. Now, one more thing about the conservative mindset. The conservative mindset tends to be more willing to accept hierarchy because it's seen as just a natural part of reality, which, to be honest, it is, by the way. That's actually true. So that sense of being realistic, accepting authority, hierarchy, etc. These are all aspects of the conservative mindset. Now, we talked about the liberal mindset. Liberalism, when it goes to an extreme, oh, sorry, let me go back. First of all, the liberals in a healthy sense, they tend to be more compassionate. Okay, willing to empathize with another person's situation or suffering. But taken to extremes, it can become sentimentality, right? So rather than being compassionate about what is, one is becomes sentimental about what they think should be. So it can lead to over-idealism, which is detached from the realities of a situation or the realities of a society. Now, again, using the logic of the Shastra, because these things are inherent, we can understand that Krishna creates this situation whereby in order for society to function, both sides have to do what? Anyone?
Work together.
Exactly. Yeah, because both sides have strengths and weaknesses. So in order for society to function, it will need both. And there's also an implication for us, by the way. There's I was in Spain many years ago. There was a trip and a youth retreat, and someone showed me a purport in one of Prabhupada's books. It may have been the purport in the Bhagavatam, and if I remember correctly, it talked about the staunch liberal devotee. And they asked me, what does this mean? And I explained to them, it means 100% strict with ourselves, 90% tolerant with everyone else, right? So if you look at it, what's meant to happen, a healthy devotee has a healthy integration of what you would consider the conservative principles and a healthy integration of the liberal principles, right? So a staunch liberal devotee means, it's like, another way of putting it would be that we are liberal conservatives, right? The core is conservative, meaning that we have certain principles that we live by and we don't change the philosophy. We don't go into, and this is another extreme of the left side, the extreme of liberalism is that things become relative. It's all the same. You can't say anything's good or anything's bad. It's all one, right? So liberalism taken to an extreme becomes relativistic. So it's the idea that, well, if I want to just, lie, then it's just my own values. It's my opinion that it's okay to lie. You got a different opinion, and it's all, everyone's opinion is equal. You can't say that my opinion is better than yours, or you can't say your opinion is better than mine. So that's an extreme, okay? The point is that we're meant to be a liberal conservative, not politically, I'm not talking about politics, but in the sense that we have some core values which are being given to us by higher authorities that we hold to be true. We don't hold it to be relative, that it's like, maybe true, maybe not, it's just someone's idea. We hold that there are some absolutes, there's absolute truth. At the same time, right, and this is important, at the same time, we're also accommodating of others who may see things differently, right? Another way of pulling this is that liberal at the door, conservative at the core, right? So the idea here is that if we're true to our principles, that purity will mean that there will always be some development. At the same time, we want to be open and able to dialogue and able to be considerate of other people's perspectives and feelings so that we can understand where they're coming from, and we can also dialogue and show them how oftentimes what they're looking for can be achieved through adhering to basically the laws of Krishna, okay? So there are many, many different dynamics to this. And you'll see this also in very powerful, great devotees. They are very fixed in their core, right? In their lifestyle, in their values, and these are very healthy values. And because they're fixed in their spiritual values, they're not disturbed by people who have different ways of looking at things. And they're also able to interact with people who have different ways of looking at things without feeling threatened, without feeling disturbed, and without feeling that they need to attack or undermine other people. These dynamics of wanting to attack, undermine people, minimize people behind their back, these are all symptoms of insecurity. And they're all symptoms that the person in their core is not stable and is not grounded, which causes them to overreact or underreact in a given situation. So this idea of leading from the inside out, that's a whole seminar in of itself. But the essence of it is that if we as devotees, if we continually work on ourselves and work on our character, then whatever's going on externally, it will not affect us so much. Right? This whole cancel culture, in one sense, it has a lot to do with people being very disturbed by the behaviors of others. But if we go beneath the surface, what we also find, and I'm not saying that there's some things shouldn't be prohibited, I'm not saying that at all, but what we also find is, along with being disturbed by other people's behaviors, there's also the dynamic of being more sensitive or let's say more easily shaken by narratives, ideas, behaviors which may not sit so well with our own way of seeing the world. Yeah. So no matter what happens, there's always a need for us to become more grounded and more strong internally, and then whatever else is happening to us, it will not affect us so much. Okay, so I'm going to pause here actually. We started about 11. Let me just pause here and ask, are there any questions or comments on what we've discussed so far? And then if not, we will close and we will continue in the next session.
I've got one question, Prabhu. By the way, it's really interesting. I've made like so many notes. It's like a fantastic class. So this is all, I guess it's all good in terms of how we can kind of manage ourselves as a leader and kind of, as you said, get your character right and be a philosopher, etc. But kind of one of the challenges I have, just put it on the table, is the people around me. So, you know, when they're not acting in that way, and then, especially because I work for a company, I have to then be a bit political, because even if I don't agree with some of the things they're doing or saying or how they're saying it, if I speak out, then I might get a sack at a very simple level, right?
Yes, it's a good question. So first of all, thank you for your question. So this is a point we touched upon earlier, but I'll make it more explicit because I think it's really important what you're saying. When we do all of these things, and we'll go through these 10 things as we go through the sessions, there's an implicit understanding that you'll get the best outcomes based upon what you're working with, right? So that's the point. So let's say the example that you gave, you'll be working with certain people. If you lead to the best of your ability, you'll get the best outcomes from your team based upon where their starting point, right? And that's why it's the best of whatever situation we're in. So let's say that you're a great leader, but you've inherited a team and they're not so capable, not so competent, etc., etc. But you do everything you're meant to do as a leader, then they'll be as functional, they'll be as operational, they'll be as productive as they can be, given that you're leading properly, right? But so let's say that they all came in at -10, you're leading really, really well. So because of your leadership, you'll get them to 0, right? But if you were doing the same leadership that you were doing, following the same principles, and you were working with people who were already at level 2, and you were doing that same thing, they would get to at least level 12. The output would at least be level 12, because there's always a starting point. Okay. There's always a starting point. So there's always, let's say, there's always certain boundaries that we're having to function within. Yeah. And so at least we do the best we can within the boundaries that we have to function within. And then also what's important, and this is another great thing about the Vedic knowledge, because it's comprehensive, when you're doing all of these things and you're doing them properly, then you know that whatever outcome you're getting, this is the best that we can actually do at this time. Whereas if we're not doing it properly, or we don't have a comprehensive understanding, there's always that niggling sense that maybe I'm actually doing something wrong, because I don't know the whole science. So I don't know if I'm leaving out certain key things that I should be doing as a leader in this particular context. Does that make some sense, right? Now, of course, again, logic of the Shastra, there's an implication from all this. And the implication is that where you want to do really amazing things, and where you have the possibility to do it, you would choose the raw materials, you choose the people that you're leading with. You see the point? So let's say you're a great leader and you're working with people who are really capable and competent and have good character, then that is a formula for optimization.
Yeah.
Yep. But where you can't choose that and you're inheriting a certain group of people, still, we have to still love them because we're also at a certain level. And we try to do the best we can, try to elevate the situation as much as we can, given where we are all coming from, where we're all starting from. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's why many companies will do a whole thing about hunting talent. Because what they try to do is they try to optimize the team and they try to optimize the leadership, you know? So in this book, Bhakti Tirthamaj says something very revolutionary, and maybe we'll end on this before, on this, or maybe one or two other questions. He talks about the importance of the leaders being trained, but he says also it's extremely essential also that the people are trained to understand good leadership. Because if not, and I'm sure, you know, if we look at what's happening in modern times, there'll be some people who are like, dude, this person's not going to be a good leader, and they could see it from the beginning. There'll be other people who are like, no, you can't tell. But actually you can. If you know what the criteria for leadership is, that criteria, you can then evaluate people against the criteria, and you can see actually who will be a great leader, who won't be a great leader, by looking at their behavior evaluated against these eternal criteria. You see? So so leadership training actually is not meant to be just for leaders. It's the biggest mistake that's made in self-help. Proper leadership training is meant to be for the leaders and the followers. It's meant to train people in how to lead, and it's meant to train people in how to recognize good leadership as well. Because if you have good leadership and the people don't recognize it, what they'll do is they'll get rid of good leadership in order to take shelter of bad leaders who will exploit them, and they won't know that they're going to be exploited. You see? So when there's a gap, democracy works as long as people are actually in knowledge, in proper knowledge of the truth. But if people are manipulated and they're not given proper information, then democracy doesn't work, because it means that if I'm good at manipulating you and giving you the wrong understanding, you'll vote for me, even though if you had all the facts to hand, you would know that this person's a charlatan or a cheat. Do you see where I'm coming from? Yeah. So yes, you have to do the best within the boundaries that you have. That's the point. But also bear in mind that, again, leadership principles that we're talking about, they're multi-directional. So as a leader, I'm not just meant to build relationship with the people that I'm leading. As a leader, I'm also, and this is another thing that's often missed on the radar. As a leader, it is equally, if not more important, that I build relationships with the people who are leading me. Right? Because by building the relationship with the people who are leading me, I'll also be able to influence upwards along with downwards. You see? And because it's a thread, by influencing upwards, I'm able to get better outcomes from the people that I'm leading myself. You see? So for example, if I've got a good relationship with my boss, I can get him to do things which will assist me to actually help my team to also be the best that they can be. You see? So the model actually from the Vedic point of view is multi-directional. And the reason why I say multi-directional is implicit. So who, in the Vedic literatures, who do the Kshatriyas also look up to?
Harmonies.
The Brahmanas.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's no such thing in the Vedic culture as a leader who only looks down. You see, that's a modern concoction. In the Vedic system, and even in the spiritual world, there is no leader with no one above him or her. Right? That will never be done. Even pure devotees, they consider that they are servants of their guru. So all healthy leadership models contextualize the leader. The leader is contextualized as being an individual within a chain. And that chain has individuals above the leader and individuals below the leader. Make sense?
Yeah, very good.
Actually, to be honest, even that chain usually has individuals beside the leader as well. So the leader will have his or her peers, they will have their seniors, and they'll have their juniors. And this idea of these multi-dimensional relationships are given by Narada Muni, you know, like that. So even for us as devotees, you're senior to someone, right? You're junior to someone else, and you're a peer of someone else. Like that. Make sense?
Very good. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Did anyone else have a question or a comment?
I have a quick comment. Thank you very much, Prabhu, for a nice presentation. Just really like this point that you made about conservatives and liberals, and we see that very much prominent in, among devotees. There's this big divide, and I was thinking a lot about this, and what you were saying is just so much, you know, from what I was thinking as well, because you know we do need conservative approach to preserve our teachings and not lose and you know kind of the essence of it. But then we need the liberals in order to remain relevant, because if we just push hard with our conservatism, you can see in some parts of the movement, it is not expanding and stagnant. But if you are always thinking, you know, we're preserving the core, but we are making the entry at the door very open to everyone, and it has to be dynamic, as always evolving into something else to remain relevant. So both aspects are significant to successful expansion.
Absolutely. So yeah, this is a great point, and that's the integration that needs to be there. But sometimes in our communities, rather than appreciating what the other perspective has to offer, we just make them into be the demons or the the bad people. So the conservatives, what they're very good at doing is that they can keep that something going, right? So they can just manage a system. The liberals, because of that creativity, they can find dynamic ways to open new territories, right? To pioneer in that sense. See, the conservatives are more traditionalists for want of a better term, in some ways, and the liberals can be more pioneering. So we need all of those qualities, but we need them integrated in a healthy sense. Yeah, and it's interesting also, the research says that people are born with these mentalities. You see, people think it's because I studied the facts in the news and I came to a conclusion, but actually people are born with conservative or liberal mentalities. And then it's further, it's adjusted or reinforced by upbringing, and then also by association, etc., etc. So yeah, all of these factors play a role.
What is your advice for integration? Because you know it seems to be such a challenge.
Yeah, it's easy to integrate these things. The first thing we have to do is appreciate what the other side has to offer. You see, if I'm a conservative, I shouldn't think all the liberals are bad. They're just trying to get rid of the movement and they're going to water everything down. And before you know it, there'll be no Krishna consciousness. I should try to see what's good about that perspective. You see, it's part of the reality. It's part of the creation. What's good about that perspective? And if I'm a liberal, I shouldn't think, oh, these conservatives, they're just rigid and backwards and they're living in the 1960s and, you know, and they're holding back the progress of the movement. No, I should consider what's good about that perspective. You know, what elements that perspective, or another way of looking at it is, and this is actually even more accurate, whatever it is that we're dealing with in terms of conservatives or liberals, you should consider, this is a scientific way of doing it. I came across this system, which I was kind of figuring out. What you do is you look at any particular perspective and you can consider, okay, so I'm looking at the liberals, right? What does liberalism look like in the mode of ignorance? What does liberalism look like in the mode of passion? And what does liberalism look like when it's balanced, right? And that balanced version of liberalism is very, very healthy. And you do the same thing for the conservative side. What does conservatism look like in the mode of ignorance? What does conservatism look like in the mode of passion? What does conservatism look like in the mode of goodness, right? And again, because in the mode of goodness, you'll see the balanced form of it, right? And just like the yin and the yang, the balanced form of conservatism will have some elements of liberalism in there, right? And same thing, the balanced form of liberalism will have some elements of conservatism in there. So that's, yeah, and that's really what we're looking for. And Prabhupada knew this, by the way. That's why he, rather than talking about lots of different things, he just said, come to the mode of goodness, because he knows that if you're in the mode of goodness, there'll be the balanced form. In the mode of goodness, one will not just be completely liberal, right, which to an extreme. And in the mode of goodness, one will not be completely conservative, but they'll have the right balance of both of these qualities, but in the right places. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Prabhu?
It's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question. I think Sudhir and Nitai, did you have a question? Were you going to unmute?
Yeah, so I just had a few sort of things that I was thinking about from the session. So thank you again very much. When we were discussing in the beginning, I think the first point was about the care for the devotee, for the people that were being led. And one thing that was interesting, a few months ago, I was in Dubai and we were going somewhere, and the driver was explaining to us like the system of how Dubai works. And he was saying the people that are born in the country, the leadership actually provide them all their basic needs. They provide them with a place to live, they provide them with a job, a salary, and when the people are ready to get married, they actually help them to get their own place separate from the parents, and then provide some job. And I was just thinking that's such a interesting model, how like those people are being taken care of. And then I was thinking how obviously like there are probably challenges they face in that country, but you don't really hear so much about it. So potentially like a lot of those people, they're not, even if things are going wrong with leadership, and I think we read a little bit about the king in Dubai, and he wasn't so, like, he's been seen to have done certain things, but I guess the people there, because the fact that they're provided this facility by the king, they're actually like, you know, able to follow his leadership, and they're very like you know, respectful of him, and etc. So that was interesting. I was just in like, it's a model that you don't, is rare, right? Like, where do you hear about that?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on that, because that's such a brilliant point. Yeah, it goes a long way, because what people don't know is that the laws of Dharma are actually laws of the mind, right? They actually affect the mind. And so what they do is they trigger or inspire certain types of behavior, you see? So if the leaders are protective consistently, right, if they do it properly, then it inspires a certain type of behavior from the followers. You see, that's why Manu Samhita says the king who does not protect his citizens is a dead king, because so let's say that you're the king, right, and the citizens are not feeling protected. Then what they will actually feel is there's no loss to killing you, right? This is a person who's the king. He's not protecting us. So if we get rid of him, or even if we walk away, there's absolutely no loss. What's meant to happen, what was meant to happen in traditional societies, is that part of the loving reciprocation between the seniors and the juniors was that the juniors were quality people. And because they were quality people, they could also appreciate how much the seniors were doing for them, you see? And what it would also imply is actually you gain more by dealing properly with the seniors. One of the, you know, people talk about how, you know, even in our movement, oh, you know, people don't respect the seniors, etc. And that's true, actually. But it's also because what they've seen is that the seniors have exploited them. So if they feel that they're being exploited by people, then they will not have respect for those people, you know? But if you see that actually your life improves by being respectful to your seniors, it will reinforce that tendency. And of course, it will the blessings of Krishna come from senior down to junior, you know? So it actually means if people have respect for their seniors, and you know, the seniors also behave properly, but if people have respect for the seniors, then the juniors actually become more powerful. To the extent that they don't respect their seniors, to that extent, they actually become weak, subtly, psychologically, and spiritually. My Guru Maharaj spoke about this in a class. He was talking, I found the class, but I can't remember the name of it, but I listened to it. It must have been maybe 2018, 2019. I was listening, I actually heard it. And he was talking about this culture of people not respecting authority, and how, and the negative ramifications of it. It was a definite eye-opener. So yeah, that's the point. Yeah.
And then there's two other things. One was when you mentioned I think it was Parashara Muni, is it?
Yes.
Parashara? And the three characteristics, you said nature of the individual, so that's like the Varna upbringing, and association. But I was also thinking association, wouldn't that also mean like society as well?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
yeah, and then I guess that connects with what you hear about to do. I think it's called epigenetics, where they say like your genes are activated by this
Environment,
like,
yeah.
surrounding
Yeah.
environment. So that ties then like
Yeah.
perfectly with, which then is coming back to your initial point at the beginning. That's how I guess how we see the Shabda and the, you know, and the Anumana, so the infer or the
Yes.
Pratyeka, right?
I love that point. By the way, I love that point. This is also why the scriptural emphasis on association is so powerful. Because we may have a certain nature, we may have been brought up a certain way, right? But the last level, as you said, with epigenetics, just in case people don't know what it is, what they found is certain things can actually switch on certain aspects of our DNA and switch off other aspects. You see the point? So you may have all kinds of tendencies within you, but some of them can be activated or deactivated. And good association, what it does is it activates the positive qualities, and it can help to deactivate and even switch off negative traits as well, right? But of course, it's always on the basis that one actually deals with that association properly. Otherwise, it doesn't. Otherwise, actually, you get the negative effect. If they're seniors and they're not respected properly, the offense causes the lower nature to come prominent and the spiritual nature to become suppressed. Yeah. Anything else you're doing there?
And then the point you mentioned about the liberal and the conservative, you said what was the percentage you said? Like we should be, didn't quite catch that.
I didn't say there's a percentage, I said we have to have both integrated in a healthy way.
Oh, but for yourself, like you'd be 90% like
Oh yeah, Prabhupada, that's Prabhupada.
Oh, Prabhupada, yeah.
Prabhupada says 100% strict with ourselves, 90% tolerant with others. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so what we'll do in the next session is that we'll carry on going through those other, I think we did the first 5. We'll go through the second 5 principles. We'll have all 10 principles. And then from there, we'll start to go into a bit of a deep dive into leadership in general. And just bear in mind, I really want to reinforce this idea of we start with the conclusions. The deliberate purpose of that is because of the following. The way the mind works is that it attaches details to principles. So what happens in the Vedic system is when you give people the principles first, and then you give them the details after, they'll be more likely to remember everything that they've learned and more able to apply everything they've learned. Why? Because it's like this. It's like me giving you 10 boxes, right? And I give you all these little slips of paper. And every time I give you a slip of paper, which is a detail, you can figure out which box it's meant to go into, you see? So you're ordering the information, you're ordering the details around the key concepts or ideas. Does that make some sense? So what we'll do is next session, we'll go through the next 5. We'll probably just cover that in the next session. And then what we'll do is we'll start going through the book in more detail. And as we go through, you'll be able to think, okay, that point that relates to this law, this one of the 10 leadership principles. Then you'll hear something else. Oh, that detail that links onto this particular principle. So it helps you to self-order the material in such a way that it's more memorable, more accessible, and more applicable as well. Okay, so thank you very much. We'll stop there and we'll continue in our next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Thank
Haribol.
Hare Krishna.
Haribol.